Welcome to Right Now. It seems we've got a civil war and cyber attacks to throw into the mix with a healthy slice of corona variants. It really is relentless. On the show today, we have Dr. Andrew Rallis, a senior research scientist who completed his postdoctoral studies at Stanford University in pathology. He obtained a master's in virology at Imperial College London, as well as graduating with a PhD in neurobiology from King's College London. Why aren't any doctors speaking out? Dr. Ellis will be telling us why he's penned a letter to the US, UK, French, Italian and German governments to highlight the incorrect use of the COVID-19 PCR test as a diagnostic tool. And of course, the use of testing asymptomatic, buzzword, people to implement emergency laws which curtail fundamental freedoms and human rights. So I'm really looking forward to that. Float is a brand new free speech platform currently in its beta stage. It aims to give people back their voice and provide an alternative to Silicon Valley. Founders Erin and Kingsley Edwards will be coming on the show. On the subject of censorship, my dad, or Grandad D as my daughter calls him, David Icke will be coming on to talk about the UK's new harms bill and what that means for freedom of speech and of course freedom of the press. We'll be hearing from our Australian correspondent Naomi Cook. She'll be telling us about some crazy developments, if it could get any more crazy over there, including the closing of borders indefinitely. Free Australia, eh? Where's Crocodile Dundee when you need him? We spoke to Gal Shalev some weeks ago about the two-tier vaccine system that was ripping through Israeli society. And I said it would be great to get him back on to give us an update about what's happening in the country. Since then, a powder keg has gone off to the point where not only are rockets being fired left, right and centre, but people are actually running each other over and lynching people in the street. This is like something from a horror film. Gal, how are you, mate? First of all.
Hey, how are you, Gareth? It's good to see you again, buddy.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Just it would be better if it was under different circumstances. What is happening where you are?
Yeah, if I thought it was nuts last time, it's only getting worse. So, where do I start? We had this crazy vaccine campaign, complete medical apartheid over here, and now it just seems, I'm gonna put my tinfoil hat on. It just seems so manufactured. We're having all these street violence, civil war. For people who don't know, because I seem to see, obviously there's a lot of criticism towards Israel and their behavior with the Palestinian nation, and it's all warranted and that's fine. But people need to understand that within Israel, within the borders of Israel, we live with about 2 million Arabs. Side by side, we go to school together, we work together. They have restaurants, they have stores, and we do business together. So we live just fine together. And now it just seems like a civil war is breaking out. People are running each other over in the streets. People are lynching one another. Swarms of Israeli Arabs are walking through the streets looking for any Jew that they can find, whether innocent or not, and literally lynching them. And the same with the Jews. Jews are doing the same thing. They're just looking for any Arab to just grab and completely lynch, and it's just unbelievable. It's quite scary.
I was going to say, Gal, my next question was, does this feel different? Because obviously from someone here in England looking in, there, kind of rockets coming from Gaza, attacks coming from Israel. This seems to be like this happens every 3 or 4 years or whatever. It feels different now. Like I don't remember seeing this kind of stuff where people are just running people over in the street. It seems like humanity has just kind of been deleted.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit of what I was seeing in the streets of the U.S. Just before the 2020 elections with the BLM and all this violence and stuff like that. It just seems like, just copy paste. And this kind of stuff, it happened in Israel before. We had the Intifada. And we had all types of situations where, a person would just take out a knife and start stabbing people randomly. Usually it'd be either a Palestinian or an Arab that is upset with the Israeli policies. And, they'd come up to just innocent people on the street and start stabbing them. And then there'd be a whole ruckus, and sometimes he'd get lynched. But, we've never seen it on this we've never seen this scale of violence. Cars being burnt down. Hundreds, if not over 1,000 people walking down the street looking for anybody to beat up, and like literally anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a kid, an older man. Complete violence, complete mob mentality. that we've never seen before. Like literally, if my mom would ask me to come and visit her right now, I'd think about it a few times, because a lot of intersections right now are being closed by these mob mentality people. And you know, whether it's Arabs thinking that I'm a Jew, or maybe it'll even be Jews that would think I'm an Arab. I don't know, but they might even hit the wrong person. So
where does this end? Where does this end? Because it's getting to a point now where I mean, I'm ever the optimist about life in general. I think you have to be, because it's too crazy otherwise. But I don't know where this ends now. What's your thoughts on that?
so it just looks, like I said, it looks very fabricated. So I'm pretty sure whenever they want to put an end to it, they'll put an end to it. But I think they want to, so it's pretty amazing. Like, the fear factor about the coronavirus, even though everybody was vaccinated, was still yay high. And then as soon as the rockets, or as soon as this little escalation started happening about 2 weeks ago, suddenly nobody talks about the coronavirus. There's no fear about the coronavirus. There's nothing on the news about coronavirus. It's all about this escalation of violence. And then as soon as people started, swarming the streets, the rockets stopped coming in. It's so weird. Like, so I don't really get what's happening here. Like, I'm saying this really confused. Like, as soon as people started swarming the streets, the rockets stopped coming in, which is complete opposite of what you would think, because there'd be a lot more casualties if they threw in rockets while people are on the streets. So something completely weird is happening here. Nothing is logical. End game, if you ask me what I'm thinking, if we look at, the problem reaction solution hypothesis, then what they want is the army on the streets, and they want complete control, and I think this is a good way for them to get it.
If there is a ground invasion of Gaza, which is what we're hearing here in the news here that they're talking about, what does that mean for you in Israel? Because
Look,
because there's something going to come back as a result of that, obviously.
well, it's a massive mistake, and again, I really want to stress for people who just want to blindly, hate the Israelis or the Jewish people. You have to understand that many of us are completely against this. There's many pacifists here, many people who, when I say many, I'm talking about millions, that are completely against any type of violence, any type of occupation. Um, they use us as pawns. I mean, they use us as pawns on both sides. But the international opinion is that a person like me wants, people in Palestine to be hurt or to be killed, and that's just not true. And to get to your question, if we do see a ground invasion, a lot of us are going to be very upset, because we know what the price is going to be. A lot of young people who have to be in the army, because it's a must to be in the army in Israel, they're still 18, 19 years old. They know nothing about war. They don't want a war. And they're going to go in there and they're going to get killed. And a lot of Palestinians are going to get hurt. And it'll just make things escalate.
That was, to be fair, Gal, that was going to be my final question, was actually asking if there is still a big desire for peace on the ground in Israel. But you've basically answered it. So, because we get that in the media here, and we get it certainly on social media here, as you've just described, the fact that Israelis are all behind this. They support this. This is Netanyahu's, he's looking after his people, and that's just not the case then.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I mean, it's obviously a mix, right? You have people who are pro-war because they're very right-leaning. It comes from brainwashing. It doesn't come from their natural opinion, but they're brainwashed just as much as the other side is brainwashed. They think that, terrorists live on the other side, and they're all terrorists, and all of them want Jews to be killed, and that's their opinion. And when you fear someone or you fear something, you want to deal with it. Anybody who, and it's just like the coronavirus, anybody who was not brainwashed didn't live in fear, and therefore didn't want to wear a mask, didn't want to impose any rules or restrictions on people, didn't want to take the vaccination. Same thing with war. Anybody who lives in fear relishes the war against their enemy. Anybody who knows that this is all a trick, it's all a mind. I want to say the word F, but I'm not going to say it.
I think everyone got what you're implying. Yeah.
Again, it's so important, because it's very hard to kind of have these conversations on Twitter and stuff like that, and I get very tense when I'll post something, and then people are underneath are like, yeah, you guys deserve to die, and blah blah blah. This is what you get. This is all karma. they have to understand that what they're saying and what they're doing on Twitter when they're saying that, they're being those brainwashed mentality people that don't understand that a person like me and many like me, a lot, there's a huge left leaning, and it's not like the same as the left in America, but left leaning in terms of peaceful people who don't want any war, who don't want to occupy the Gaza Strip, who don't want all this conflict. There's more of us than you think, and the ones who act according to the book with war, it's because they're brainwashed, not because of anything else. It's just because they live in fear. So the same way I wouldn't blame somebody who ran to get the Pfizer vaccine, it's very hard to blame somebody for fearing, the Gaza Strip or the Palestinian people as thinking that they're terrorists and we need to deal with them. But both sides are being used as pawns, and we have to understand that, and we have to be very understanding of one another.
Absolutely, we do. Absolutely. Thanks for talking to me, Gal. And I tell you what, I feel a little bit better, to be fair, after listening to that, what you're saying, the fact that there are these groups of people that are like, and obviously the more that can grow, and realise on both sides that both sides are being played and used and will be discarded at any point that they're no longer useful. And that's the whole thing everywhere. You've got black and white, and it's the grey area in the middle that I think, people seem to ignore.
All people need to look at is the last round of elections, and basically it was half, like half wanted Bibi Netanyahu out, and half, quote unquote, still wanted him in. So at least half the nation is against this conflict, against the war, and don't want to have anything to do with it. So every time you see the right in control, there's usually about at least 45% to 50% who want them out of control, which means a peace-loving nation that just wants to have a conflict-free life.
Well, let's just hope that percentage grows, and I hope obviously yourself and your family are safe.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you for having me. Thank you for all the kind words while we're talking personally, and thank you for the invitations, and it's a great friendship that's been built here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gal. I appreciate that.
All right, my man.
Dr. Andrew Ellis, he's a man with more credentials than you could chuck a test swab at. He's penned a letter to various governments pointing out the massive flaws in PCR testing, and in particular, the mass testing of people that quite simply aren't ill. Thank you very much for coming on. Would you be able to give us just a small kind of a brief summary of what you wrote in the letter that you wrote to the government?
Exactly. Well, I've written a letter, a very urgent letter, to more governments in Western Europe and in the US as well, and I'm continuing Canada and other countries. What we've written is about the fraud that's occurred with this whole COVID scam. First of all, the test, which has enabled confinement of healthy people, the first time that's been done in history, which they basically categorize as asymptomatic. The test is known to generate 90% false positive results, and it was supposed never to be used for a viral diagnostic test. Even the inventor of the PCR test, Kerry Mullis himself, said that. So, first of all, the premise is completely incorrect for diagnosing or detecting it. And also, you can use electron microscopy to detect, at least for the morphology of the virus. And that's not been done in this case. They're using an RT-PCR test, which basically detects the genetic code or fragments of the projected code of the virus. And also, they found one of the primers used is also present on chromosome 8 in the human body, because it's known that the human body also has human endogenous retroviruses, which are integrated. So you have viral genomes integrated within the human chromosome itself. So an unreliable test. And also scientists have found that SARS-CoV-2 can also integrate within the genome using culture. So it's actually not worth even taking the test, to be honest. It's completely fraudulent. It shouldn't have been used or proposed even under an emergency law. That's the first thing.
I'm taking it you've not received a reply at all from any of these governments.
I have received a few replies, but the issue with so there's two general problems in the population. The first is a mass conditioning, generational conditioning of the population. So they don't have access to the information. They have access to only one channel of information, which constantly repeats or espouses the same mantra constantly. Oh, by the way, COVID is dangerous. You have to lock down people to protect yourself. You're culpable if you're not abiding by these so-called laws. And the response has been completely authoritarian and it's been all enacted via an emergency laws. So there's been real open debate over the subject. There's been no investigative committees. So the first issue is a test currently, which should be banned. It's fraudulent. The second issue is the experimental so-called vaccine, which can't really be as a vaccine, especially if you're talking about the usage of the mRNA therapy. This is basically a mass trial of the population in terms of the vaccine. It's been looked at in healthy people for a few months, and usually a vaccine takes at least 5 to 7 years to undergo proper long-term health risk assessments. So that's another thing which is malpractice. Anyone administering that as well can go and be prosecuted under the Nuremberg law.
See, that's another thing. So is it 1,000 doctors, 1,000 health professionals have
Exactly, it's over. It's more than the thousands. So it's 10,000 lawyers and medical experts,
wow.
and it's 10,000 doctors and 1,000 lawyers are filing a petition, and they're going to start court action lawsuits against all the people administering this experimental therapy, because the Nuremberg Code and Geneva Convention 32 states that you can't administer experimental therapies on healthy individuals or protected persons. So that's a violation of the Nuremberg Code, and those were obviously implemented in the Second World War in 1947 because of the experiments of Dr. Mengele, the SS and the Nazis, which were experimenting on healthy individuals. And since this trial is completely experimental, then the Nuremberg Code can be implemented. These people can be prosecuted.
See, a man with your background is clearly an issue for these people, because I always think like it's quite easy to just dismiss an activist or whatever, but if you've got King's College London and Stanford University, and perhaps more importantly Imperial College London in your CV, as you do, that seems to be a bit of a problem, really. Have you had any comeback at all for your stance of speaking out against this?
I did have one. It's very interesting because I'm in contact with Mike Yeadon, who actually spoken out, and he's very kind of elegant in the way he's trying to actually find out what's the objective or the motive for this. And he's previously working as a CEO for Pfizer, I think was a vice president at one point. And he realized actually he was involved in producing pharmaceuticals and toxicology, and he realized this vaccine doesn't, he tried to figure out, what's the purpose of this? Does it make any sense to try and inoculate billions of people or the global populace with an experimental vaccine? What are the motives behind it? And then he visualized how quickly society has transformed within or more. So Mike Yeadon's a very famous scientist also, and he's also come out, and he lost a lot of colleagues. I mean, the problem is academia is very stagnant, and that academia is one of the most conditioned professions on the planet, in fact. And it applies to many things within that. For instance, you have Dr. Robert Young, who was able to cure his patients who had very aggressive cancer in the hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands, and that information was suppressed. So, I mean, the thing is, a lot of people are losing out because of people speaking out, so they try and suppress the information. But so far, I've received a few responses from some MPs who are mainly pro-Brexiteers or patriots. I haven't received really anything from the mainstream parties or the mainstream stance, which is quite sad, actually.
It's sad, but it's completely unsurprising. In your opinion, where does this end then? Because from what I can see, the testing industry is getting to a point now where financially it's almost like the military-industrial complex, in the sense that it's almost too big to fail. So they don't want this to end because people are making a lot of money off of it. So do you think that A, is it going to end, and B, do you think maybe that the stance that you're taking and these lawyers and these doctors have actually, invoking the Nuremberg Code could be a way to end this?
So I think it's basically a chain of command, and it starts from the global institutions. It starts from the World Health Organization, the CDC. It filters down to the NHS and directors on the board. Then it goes through via administration to doctors and nurses. So this chain of command has to be broken on multiple levels for this to stop. And it can be broken if this fraud is actually somehow exposed, which is what we're currently trying to do. So, yeah, of course, it's more than capable. I think that this so-called military-industrial or medical-industrial complex want you to feel that you're completely weakless and there's no cure for COVID. And that's the other thing. There are multiple treatments for COVID-19, which are known to, and that information has also been suppressed. So Dr. McCullough, another famous scientist, he's done a lot of these studies outlining the effectiveness of ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D, at least to prevent you from getting the virus, but that's not publicized at all. They want to leave the population in a state of hopelessness and vulnerability, saying, oh, by the way, it's not possible. There's no cure. You have to come to us, to the global institutions, and take these orders. And anything you say contrary to the global institutions' mantra is censored and labeled as disinfo. So that's why we have to basically fight back and prevent this.
As I understand it as well, if you have a treatment for any particular illness, then you don't get emergency approval for vaccination, do you?
Well, exactly, and that's what Dr. Mercola outlined as well, and Didier Raoult of the University of Marseille. He was able to show there was a 90% recovery rate in patients who took treatment with hydroxychloroquine. So yes, exactly, you're not able to implement any sort of emergency law if there's alternative treatments available for this. So this is also highlighted in one of the 10 Nuremberg codes as well relating to this matter.
So how can people find this this court case and read, all the details of this? Because I'm guessing people watching this will want to go away and check this out.
Exactly. So first of all, it's on Dr. Robert Young has posted it on his site. So if you go directly to Dr. Robert Young's website, you can find this. And this is also this would also be available on the lawyer who's actually initiated this, who is Rainer Formich, which I'll send you details of, and you can also post it on your website.
Of course.
So he's a doctor who's also taken action against Deutsche Bank, and he's actually been victorious against them for multiple corruption cases. So I mean, you can take these people on and win pretty easily, but it's just a matter of having action behind what you're trying to do. That's a big secret. It's these institutions want to make the population feel helpless with the constant censorship and the constant fear-mongering.
Of course, yeah, which is what all these new variants are about. Well, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us. And I really hope this is, because not that I'm a big kind of advocate of chucking people in prison, but part of me thinks, there's quite a lot of people in the world now that could do with a long stint behind bars for what they've done to humanity.
Well, the problem is you have the people who are privy to what's going on, and you have the people completely conditioned or ignorant. So our job is to do a grafter's job, and to propagate the necessary information. So the individual can use, okay, what are the risks of taking this experimental injection, this COVID-19 injection? How many people have died thus far? How many adverse reactions have there been? And people aren't really privy to this information. They don't know where they can find it. So our job is to actually provide a balance in the media so people can check out both narratives for themselves, which one they feel is the truth.
Exactly. Informed consent. That's all any of us are asking for.
Which is not happening at the moment.
No, absolutely not. But once again, thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully I'll be able to talk to you again in the future when this is a bit further down the line and we're celebrating some form of victory.
Hopefully. Okay, all the best. Take care.
To continue watching this episode of Right Now, please click on to iconic.com.